Messaging, elevator pitch, prepared for and presented at the 2016 Square One Entrepreneurship Training Program. Square One is a program of the Center for Emerging Technologies. CET is an affiliate of the Cortex Innovation Community. Square One is funded in part by the Missouri Technology Corporation.
What's the big deal about a pitch? Like, why is this important? Well, part of it is because, as you've probably come to know in your entrepreneurial careers, there are a lot of people who want the attention of investors and consumers, and you've got to figure out how best to get your message across. So why? What's important? So I actually stole this information from a friend who works with entrepreneurs in a bank. But as you see, an equity group can see 3,000 plus people and only fund 4 to 6 ventures. One angel group sees 600 potential deals and only funds 12. I did math, less than 2% on both. Not saying to scare you, saying that people are kind of like this goldfish. Actually, we have a shorter attention span than this goldfish. True, that's science. But I mean, really, we're about 8 seconds now of, concurrent sort of thought. So basically, everybody's kind of in one phase or another of information overload. So it's your job, or part of your job, is to figure out how to cut through all that clutter. And just some more data on that clutter. 1970, an average person saw 500 ads. In 2005, that was 5,000. I don't know what's happened in the past 10 years, but I'm guessing it's more. And YouTube, same thing. If a video takes longer than 2 seconds to load, I'm sure you guys have all felt this with your phones and web pages and whatnot, you're like, I'm out. So part of your pitch is figuring out how to cut through all of that so they can hear you and hear what you have to say and learn about you and your business. So if you will, there's a handout that get ready, not quite yet, but so I'm going to talk about the 3 C's of storytelling. And when I talk about storytelling, and I'm also talking about storytelling because I used to tell stories, but we're talking about your story and your business's story and your product's story. And so in thinking about this and thinking about what Reshma had to say about your brand and all of the pieces, all of the components that make up you and your business, that's what we're going to be thinking about. So the first C is clear. We need to be clear. So back to my newspaper life, a newspaper is supposed to be written for the average age or 6th grade reading level, right? So thinking about when you write that you want to use clear language that everyone understands. We all come from our industries, or we're kind of around people who might think a lot like us, and it's best to use language that is clear, avoid jargon, avoid acronyms, but be clear. And the next one is concise. As you see, if we have the attention span of less than goldfish, brevity is good, but also getting to the point, but in a way that grabs people and reaches people. So a good pitch, should take no longer than 30 to 60 seconds. Now we're going to kind of get into a little bit more of the how, but brevity is better. Now, different audiences, one thing that I like that Reshma touched on, and we'll get to it later on, in a few minutes, but it really depends on your audience, right? So, I mean, let's take the elevator pitch at face value. You're really in an elevator, right? Let's just use that example because I saw some eyeballs at 30 to 60 seconds. So you don't have a lot of time to say what you might say as if you were in, a setting like this. I mean, I could have a 45-minute pitch or a 20-minute pitch. I could, if you're in a more casual setting, you might have something longer. So part of it depends on your audience, but still the concept of you want to be concise, and that goes into that holistic brand that Reshma touched on, and like knowing who you are or what your business is and what your values are, because that way it's easy to cut through the clutter. So the third C is to be compelling. And this is a little bit more nebulous, I realize, and it might take some time, might not be as concise to get there, but it's to be compelling. So the idea is to think about what makes you different, what makes you, your product, different than everybody else. As my friend always likes to say, he calls them the WIFM, the what's in it for me, but thinking about what's the part that's going to make, why should I care? And back into news, what makes something newsworthy is why should we care about this? So thinking about you is what makes you the superhero? What makes your product the best, most incredible product out there? And why should people care? And think about it from a terms of not thinking about it what people might want to hear, you think that people want to hear, but what is really kind of at the essence and the core of your story or your product. And like I said, that's why all the things that Reshma talked about and thinking about yourself and your brand holistically, they all kind of tie into this, because in order to get, it's sort of like why Apple was so innovative, right? Because they've managed to, at least at the beginning, cut through all the clutter and come up with something simple. But getting down to the basics and figuring out how to distill a story in a very simple, clear, concise, compelling way takes time. So, you're going to have to cut through the clutter, but that's okay. So this is the part where we start to talk about your story. And your story as in you, as in your product, as in your business. These things are all related, and each one of you is different and unique, and that's all is your brand. And that's really back to that holistic point that in some ways your pitch is an extension of your brand. And so in the communications, public relations world that I'm in, we think about like aligning our values with whatever we're saying. So right now, for instance, I'm in sort of more, I talk about issues a lot. So how does whatever current event relate to the issues and positions that we have, and how do they align? So when you're thinking about your story, it's what are the things that are compelling? It's what's your mission statement? What are your core values? And a story can be either someone with a problem that finds a solution, or it can be someone who faces tragedy, but there's sort of an arc, but it takes time to get to. But that's why we're here and why you have worksheets. So the first question on your worksheet, we're just going to take a couple minutes, is who are you? You can think about it as in what's your mission? What are your personal goals and your core values? All right, it looks like. And we'll have time, and there will be time to ask questions. But the next one is, what do you do? And what does your company do? And because everybody here is different, and because everybody's product and stage that they're in is different, I can't give you the right answer, because there is no right answer. It's definitely up to you. But think about, as in my statement, I said, this is sort of the role I have, and then I tell stories, or I help people tell their stories. So what do you do? What does your company do? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to write it out. All right, our next question. What makes you different? What makes your product different? Some marketing folks like to say, what's the differentiator? I don't like that word necessarily, but what makes you stand out or your product stand out? What makes it unique? Again, sort of the question that all sort of reporters ask is, why should I care? What makes this interesting? Sure.
So I work for different companies from time to time, and they have like these, ostensibly they have these values, or like corporate values. Mm-hmm. It's like somewhere buried in a website, or
like the value statement, or value statement.
And like you hear things like phrases thrown around like commitment to excellence or integrity, things like that, where like everyone's like ostensibly like, yeah, I agree with this, but is there any utility to those phrases insofar as they're so overused that they're not even special anymore?
I think you're absolutely right. I think so. Sort of journalist maxim is show but not tell. So I would say that in show me your commitment to excellence. Don't tell me that you're committed to excellence. Show me how you're committed to excellence. So, I would say like in Reshma's last presentation, her work, the discussion about branding, the way she laid things out, like that to me shows a commitment to excellence. Integrity, how you show integrity. And part of storytelling is the show, not tell. So how can you sort of figure out a way to either show those values through your story or illustrate them in some way that shows that commitment to excellence or that integrity or whatever that value is? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I can see, because I'm not a branding expert, but so I can see how that could like come up over a long conversation, or like as people get to know your product. But yeah, I suspect that it's extraordinarily challenging just to like convince somebody right out of the gate that like you're genuine or earnest or you have attention to detail. I mean, it's easy to get wrong. Like if you have like misspellings or something, like you clearly don't have attention to detail. You can undermine it more easily, I think, than establish it. So I don't know. Looking forward to the rest of the presentation to figure out how, I guess.
Yeah, no, and those are great questions, and I think it ties into sort of why this is her presentation came before mine, because I would say that all those things tie together, right? And so we're looking at, so I'm going to answer it sort of two ways. I mean, your elevator pitch is really an extension of your brand in some ways, and then you are an extension of your brand. And so, even the small details and whatnot, they all go into how somebody perceives you in that moment. And that's, we could go read Blink and we could talk about some of those things, and that's part of it, but also in choosing which part of your story to tell, or what part of your story to tell, or that maybe, and I'm just making stuff up, maybe your product undergoes 26 points of inspection, whereas the next product similar to it undergoes like 12. I'm just, like I said, making numbers up. So that might be a detail that you include in how you tell your story that doesn't necessarily say, hey, I'm super attention detailed oriented and we're innovative and we're committed to excellence, but this detail kind of exemplifies or shows that. So, and I think it's one of those things that, why I'd love for you all to figure out your elevator pitch by the time I'm through with this presentation. Just like simplification takes time and editing takes time. And so the process of clearing the clutter, I mean, I'm not saying it's all cluttered, but the process of figuring out what works for you and what simple and best tells your story kind of takes time to figure that out. But these are great questions. Any other questions before we move on to the next?
Can I just respond to the question about values? So I'm one of the track leaders here. Really successful company I was involved with, rather than just saying we value integrity, would actually put things in, actions, right? So we illustrate integrity by doing the following. Is a stronger statement than saying. But I do think that if you talk about, by the way, the company was acquired, and the new set of values, by the way, I think are terrible. Much more like what you're talking about, kind of vague, loosey-goosey. But we had things like we listen to and learn from everyone, right? Because we're a very open culture. So, but again, emphasizing the behaviors that we want people to do, and therefore show their value, just like the speaker was saying. So how do they show it? What's the behavior?
So, and this kind of leads into the next question that I'll have, and it's, who are you talking to? This is the same one on your sheet. Before we I'll give you kind of just a little bit of example, but you talk about knowing your audience, and Reshma mentioned that. So in my kind of public relations world, and even in storytelling world, but what resonates with one group of people doesn't necessarily resonate with another group of people. And for some folks, I like to think about narratives versus numbers, right? For some folks, statistics are compelling, numbers are compelling. For other people, the story is compelling. Like the narrative story, the person, the human example. It's the hearts versus minds. So I think that when you're shaping your narrative and you're shaping your pitch, it's kind of good to think about who you're talking to, because you can tweak it to make it more compelling to them. I mean, financial people might want to hear numbers. I'm a words person, and I like stories. So, a story might be more compelling to me. It might be a mixture of both. It might be something, actually, I do like stories where a statistic is personified in a person. But however that works for, in your situation, but thinking about who you're talking to, because that's going to help you shape that. And honestly, you might have a couple different kinds of pitches, right? You might have a pitch that's more focused on your funding strategy when you kind of go and walk into this room, or when you think you might be around those folks, versus if you're, if you're maybe looking for people to work with, or different kinds of things. So it's not, there's no hard and fast rule, but you always want to know your audience. And so thinking about sort of same kind of concept, but thinking about, Venture Cafe, your Venture Cafe out, and granted, you might meet anybody at Venture Cafe, but but your audience might be different there than if you you met somebody at a party, you had somebody introduce you to somebody who's the head of an investment firm. So your audience, it's always, it can be different depending on what you're doing and kind of what your life looks like and where you are in this stage of your business. So I'm going to give you a minute to sort of write down some audiences. All right, so the next one is, I think, probably one of the harder ones on this one, or maybe not. What do you want? What do you want next? Or as, this would be the ask part. What's the ask out of this elevator pitch? What's your outcome? Are you trying to set up a second meeting? Is this the time where you see if you can ask for funding? I'm not sure. I mean, maybe, I don't know. But what's the outcome? What would you like to achieve? What would you like this particular conversation to do for you next? And like I said, I know this is there's a lot of layers to it. You could have a different ask for a different audience. And so you might say, instead of using the, our product uses this process point, this 26 check process point, you could say something, your audience might be different, and you might say, we have a really innovative work from home. You might have something dealing with how you structure your staff. I mean, it could be something completely different. So what you're asking might be something different than you would want from a different audience. So some ideas. I'm sure you all already have some, but are you making a sale? Are you trying to enlist support? Are you trying to set up another meeting? But thinking about, what do you want to get out of this conversation? Or what would you, in an ideal world, what would this do? What's the next step?
This is kind of a silly question, but because we're talking about pitches and being concise, and you probably have a lot of experience wordsmithing these kind of things, do you have any recommendations for how you go about asking for a sale in this context?
That is a good question. And it's one really that I'm not sure I can answer with a lot of experience. I mean, my pitches as a consultant have always been, they've always been very informal, and just sort of meeting somebody and thinking that something maybe down the road will come out. But I think that's a really good question. And so I don't know if you have any insight, Christy, into...
I wrote down shorthand, please buy some of my products, but obviously that's not the wording I want to use if I was actually talking to a potential consumer, so.
So it might come from so what is your process for making this decision, which is even a little softer than you might be. How quickly do you think, how soon would you need the order fulfilled?
Got it.
Your implies that you need, So it's hard without knowing the specific context, but you're asking, and what would the next step be? Would you like me to prepare a proposal? Would you, we talked about you needing to know whether this would work in XYZ space. So should I send the samples? To whom should I send the samples? And then what's the best time to follow up so that we can make sure we get this order in within your time frame? And you're doing everything you can to set the stage for this is going to happen. So what are the next things that have to happen for that next thing to go? And some people will, I knew Harry, I could feel Harry. And some people have very set processes, was going to be the next thing I brought up, but go ahead, sir.
That's exactly where I was gonna go.
I knew it.
It's very rare that anything worth selling can be sold in a simple
Right.
elevator pitch, right? And in fact, what you need to do is you need to get your customer into the habit of doing what you want them to do. And the best thing is to start out with something fairly easy and ask them to do that. And then, increase the level of the ask with each further iteration. So, if you, the easiest thing to ask for, I'd like a little bit more time to describe this in more detail. Recognize that here in the elevator we can't possibly cover it, right? So, when can I come by and see you for 30 minutes? That's what you're trying to sell. So making the sell is getting them to agree to the 30 minutes. And then, now you have the 30-minute meeting, you say, well, so what we're really selling is a $10,000 subscription for some software. So I know you're not going to do that in a single lead, but could we get you to try the software? So arranging a trial would be the next step in the sale. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's making the sale in steps.
Incrementally.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
No, great point. Thank you. So the next part of this is thinking about, is there a catchy phrase or something that's really going to pull them in? And this is one of the harder questions, and I would say that it's optional. I'd say that as you go through this process of kind of figuring out this elevator pitch, like it may come to you or you may have it in your head now, but thinking about the thing that really grabs them. I mean, I always like the phrase, thinking about, influencing hearts and minds, but I also know that's a little cliche too. But just something that,
Like a slogan? Or less than a slogan, but more of a...
like a tagline, kind of maybe the little explanation piece with, or the little sentence or two that just is like the zinger almost.
Like at the end of a pitch or like maybe first?
This is at the beginning.
Oh, this is
Yeah, so we've kind of gone through this sort of stages and like, what are the things that's a good question. How do you reel them in to go with the fish theme, apparently?
Can I give an example?
Yes, please.
So the best one I have is from Central Institute for the Deaf, and what they settled on was, we're a school where children who are deaf and hard of hearing learn to listen and talk without using sign language. The hook is without using sign language, right? Because at that point, I step off the elevator and I have a conversation with you in the lobby, because you want to know how we do that. It took them they're over 100 years old. It took them a long time to get to that. Because there was tons of other things they wanted to tell you about what the school does and how it trains teachers. But the hook was teaching deaf children how to listen and talk without using sign language. And for freshmen, it was January. January's for hook. Tell me what that, because you want them to ask more.
No, that was great, Christy. And I do want to, we're trying to get through a whole process and just but this is really like, it's a process. And I think what she had to say about thinking about what your company is and who you are and what your values and your mission is, and how do you transfer that in everything that you do? Like how do you transfer your values and how do you explain that in your email signatures and every interaction that you have? And really, a pitch is sort of the extension of that. And it's really the extension of, you and the heart of your company, and as entrepreneurs, the heart of the company is probably your heart too. So, I mean, it's really figuring out, it's a process. Which is why practice makes perfect. So I think a great thing about a group like this and all these sort of peer resource groups is test it with each other. Listen to each other. Try and find a comfortable target audience and try one approach, and maybe the reaction you got was lukewarm, so try the other example with different groups. And so just some general tips. And we've kind of touched on these a little bit, but be yourself. If it doesn't feel right, doesn't feel natural when you talk, people are going to know. Whether they say it or not, there's some sort of intrinsic human thing that people pick up on. So it works best when you're yourself. So find whatever language you use in this process, whatever story you tell, find something that you feel good about that's comfortable for you to say. And not just the part of speaking in front of a group comfortable, because you may have to learn to do that, but the part where the story feels like it's yours and you can own it and you can tell it with, enthusiasm, which is the last part, but enthusiasm and energy, and it feels natural. So if you slip up on a sentence and it's not, you want to get to the point, you want to memorize it as a speech or something, but it's natural. So it kind of becomes a part of you, and if you can't be yourself doing it, then it's probably not the right pitch. It's not the right approach. Also, I think we had this conversation, you might have brought up using powerful language, but in your writing, generally good writing, we like active verbs. I think we like active verbs in talking as well. So use language that's powerful. So use active verbs. Use like inspiring, innovative, instead of I have inspiration or I was inspired. But use words that are bold and, kind of are powerful and get across the point that you're trying to say with some action and a little bit of force. And skip the jargon. It's great when you're in your groups, but people don't always have, especially in a time where you might be in an elevator with them, you can't assume that they know what you're referring to. I'll give you a little journalism maxim as well, one of my favorites. We always say assume makes an ass out of you and me. Assume makes an ass out of you and me. Pardon my French, but never assume nobody. And we're all coming from the same space. I came from news, so to me, CMS was content management system. I went to work for a government-sponsored insurance company, and CMS to them is the Center for Medicaid Services. It took me like a year to figure that. My first reaction was that. So when I talk about skipping the jargon, those are things why it's important, because their acronym for something else may be completely different, and that short time where you're trying to get them to listen to your story, you don't want them thinking in the back of my mind like, what are they saying, or what does that word mean? So skip the big words, skip the jargon. So, I'll start with questions. And then the idea is if we have time and people feel comfortable, maybe they can talk about their pitches. But does anybody have questions?
Some of the feedback from a couple speakers ago was that folks wanted more time to be able to say, okay, here's how I talk about myself, tell me what you think. So this is your chance.
Can I try mine?
Huh? Yes. Yes. What's your name? Oh, well, no, tell me. Sorry.
I'll tell you when I get it. Hi, my name is Kathy. I'm the founder of Por Favor. It's a nonprofit working with women in Central America to develop unique handcrafted goods like this one that we sell to raise funds for empowerment and education of women there. And I was empowered because I grew up in Honduras, Central America. It is actually the second most violent city in the world. But when I started, it was number one. So I was inspired to be able to change that, to be able to change the way in which women live there and be able to empower them so that they can also empower themselves, their family, and their children in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Going a little longer, I typically stop at the product part, but the inspiration part, I guess, can be the additional piece.
No, thank you. So my question, do they make the purses there then?
Yes.
Okay.
I just collaborate to help with the design, so I get a little bit of my pick and my design creativity there, but the textile is actually indigenous. It has a cultural background, and it's a work of art too. So it has a lot of story behind it. The women who make it have stories, all of them. Like us right here, we all have each our own story, our uniqueness, our goals, our things that we want to reach, and that's the women that I work with have even more interesting lives than me, and I feel that I'm just following their life from a distance, I guess, but we have a strong connection in that now I get to be part of, of helping them grow. Helping them grow their business, their educational goals, just being involved.
So I think that's great. I think the one thing that I would do, I would get to how you empower them, because you never really said how you empower them. I mean, I assumed by just looking that they made them, but just, I empower them by, it might be something by, helping them have a livelihood or helping them work to support their family or some way, just the kind of how, and connect it up front. But I thought that you told a story. I thought it was great. So we had a hand up here.
Do you want me to buy it? Where do I buy it?
Do I respond or?
You can close that sale at the end of the class. Just take notice, that is a pressing question that day.
That I forget often, actually, yes.
Can I say one other thing?
Sure.
You all are entrepreneurs. You have no business until you have money. You have to make a sale of either your idea or your product. Without money coming in, you don't have a business. So, all these questions you're asking here, how do you get to the sale?
Right, but yes.
Well, no, I think it's an interesting point, because the value proposition, the presenter chose to focus in on the value she was adding for people in Honduras, not what a great bag it was.
Well, and that might be different too. So, I mean, I think
I'm not making a value judgment.
No.
The audience member that wants to help people in Honduras, that might be exactly the right sale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they donate to the charity and not buy it first.
Yeah, they're so,
You can do both.
yeah.
On that, no, I have another question actually. So
Oh.
each one of those bags is completely unique, right? Like, you don't make two of any bags.
Each one is unique.
So to me, like something is simply saying, each one of these bags is as unique as the person that makes it. And it comes with a story. And here's a part of the story that you get with every bag. It will tell you about the person that made it. You got a little card there.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else who wanted to try theirs? I'm happy to take any other questions, but we have precious time if you actually want to try yours out. You can do it from there or
All right.
wherever you like.
So, my name is Michael Keogh, and I'm the founder of Johigo, which writes software for social workers in order to save them time, their employers money, and their clients improved outcomes. So, mangle the grammar a little bit, but my name is Michael. I'm the founder of Johigo. We're building software for social workers to save them time, to save their employers money, and to improve patient outcomes.
So I thought adding the patient outcomes, because again, back to being a reporter, like what do outcomes mean? So I mean, you might want to, then that could be part of, your story, or where you flesh it, or the compelling part of it helps them answer 6 more calls.
Keep people out of the emergency.
Mm-hmm. And then back to your point is, so what's the next, what will be sort of the next thing that you'd like out of an introduction?
That's really interesting. Tell me more about love. How exactly does that work? Or how exactly do you save them time? Or how exactly do you save them money? And how exactly does that improve patient outcomes? Like, the goal was to give them 3 places to go with it.
Okay.
And be able to talk to any sort of link with those. I don't know.
And then maybe another meeting would be, or another sort of,
that's totally the goal.
or other.
Capitalize on how your software helps them get all the administrative and business stuff out of the way, frees them up to do their job. Just because social work by itself is such,
It's a little jerk, or it can be.
Doorfolio is a crowdfunding web platform that connects real estate developers with investors who may fund all or a portion of their project while earning higher than average returns.
So I don't know your name. So that would be the first part. I would introduce, just sort of who are you? And no, it was great. And I thank you for sharing, because this is, one, it's really scary to share, something that you're working on in process with a group of people. So all of you who shared, I applaud you for getting up here and sharing with the group and with me. So that would just be my first suggestion, is sort of who are you and how do you fit into this? And then could you go, it felt a little bit jargony, but I also, maybe could you read it one more time?
Yes. Doorfolio is a crowdfunding web platform that connects real estate developers with investors who may fund all or a portion of their projects while earning higher than average returns.
Okay. So you might want to try just using some different, like just from hearing that, like maybe use some more conversational language. And maybe it's an example of it helps them it helps them, both parties make more money, right? Is that sort of what I
struggle, I have another pitch that I usually do, but I struggled with putting it in 30 seconds.
So I think what's important to remember about this is that it's that this is a process. And so maybe starting with the bigger thing and then kind of figuring out, like editing it down and figuring out what parts of it you really like and what parts of it you don't. And maybe it's a 60-second pitch, or maybe it's a 45-second pitch. So I would kind of play with both versions. And maybe I think it's one of those things, it's finding the hook, because less is more, because if you get somebody who is interested and, tell me more, then you'll have a couple more minutes and you won't have to squish it all in 30 seconds. So I think about making it a little bit more conversational, and if that makes it a little bit longer, I think that's okay.
There's time for one more.
Okay, I have a quick question for the pitch person. I'm sorry. You're basically like a Kickstarter for real estate, right?
I'm sorry?
You're basically like a Kickstarter for real estate, right? That might be a way to avoid some of the jargon that she was talking about. And that's like 3 or 4 hyphenated words, kind of. So that might be a good short way to do it.
And I think that is a great point. I also want to say that depending on who your audience is, there are some folks in this world, believe it or not, who may or not live or frequent this area that may not know what Kickstarter is. No, just saying.
They don't know what Kickstarter is. They don't know what a crowdfunding web-based.
No, but that's true. So it just.
But we're saying less jargon. That's part of what we're pointing to.
Right, and you might find that your real estate audience, right, when you talk to potential like real estate folks, that you find a different way to explain what crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, kickstarting, I know all these things, I'm just, need more coffee, is than versus, when you're talking to the web folks, the other side that already know that. So just kind of things to think about. But it's interesting because you kind of have like, you're kind of in two worlds, because I think I would, and I'm making an assumption here, that the digital curve for real estate folks might not be the same as folks who frequent CIC. So just something to consider. No, thank you. Time for one more, you said, Christy?
Yeah, one more.
My name is Chris Bedlin. Kaizen Retail is a management app that empowers every retail employee with the tools to be the best employee. Through simple everyday tasks, retailers can manage, analyze, and grow their business.
Good. So I think that you said retail a few times in there.
So retail's in the name, so probably don't need to say it again?
Right, well, I think you said retail, so like by the time I got to retail employee, it was sort of, and I would think about like the how, like, so, what does it analyzes?
Use simple everyday tasks, you can analyze the business and grow your business.
Such as, what might be a task?
Like, so it's everyday surveys that go down, like if you own a convenience store, to clean the bathrooms. So in that way, it's nice for the customers, or make sure that the product is on sale that's supposed to be on sale. So it's the little everyday things that you do that lead up to big changes at the end of the year.
So that might be just how you said that last couple sentences right there, like explaining how, because I might not think, okay, what's an everyday task, but you tell me, oh, it makes it easier for me to keep track of, cleaning, my shop and all these other things that, oh, I get it now, that's interesting. So I would kind of actually start with the last part that you just said.
So, and this might not be as pertinent to him who just went, but a lot of people I know in here, they have a reason that they went into the business, and as it was said earlier, there's a lot of people in here with nonprofit, give back type.
Social missions.
Social missions, thank you. Don't forget about your own story. A lot of times, an emotional sell for an emotional product is the way you want to go. You don't, we run into a lot here whenever we're talking about an IT sector, or we're talking about businesses, we're talking about very process-oriented things, and that works for a lot of people with a process-oriented product. But the few of you that have an emotional-based product, don't shy away from that. Don't be afraid to go into your story, why you're doing what you're doing. So that's all I would have to say.
No, and I would agree, and that goes back to like what makes it compelling. It goes back to what makes it compelling and who's your audience, right? Because if so I will admit I'm a words person. I deal with process when I have to, but that's not really what compels me, what's interesting or motivating to me. So it's about knowing who you're talking to, and if that is part of the most compelling part of the story and the compelling part of the story for that audience, then go with it. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.